If you're a regular viewer and you're wondering about the change of background, well, the good lady interior designer Her Indoors is undertaking a redecoration scheme in my office. So I am in the living room of Lark Rise Towers rather than the worldwide headquarters of Philip James Independent Financial Advice this weekend. And I'm talking about what I guess is not a cheery subject, could be a rather serious subject, life insurance, and so inevitably death and associated taxes. Now, life insurance has kind of come to the forefront in my mind recently as I've had a couple of situations which have once again led me to bemoan the demise, I'll say, rather than the death of the life insurance salesman. Something I've talked about, or some might say preached about, on a number of occasions. Back in the day, sorry, horrible expression, I know, nearly as bad as it is what it is. So let's say many years ago, many of us who are now advisors, in inverted commas, started off in the business selling life insurance. And very annoyingly, I'm sure, knocked on many a metaphorical door and spoke often to parents with youngish families about the need to have some life insurance. What would happen to whoever's left if one of you shuffled off or disappeared? You need to make sure there's something in place to keep the show on the road for the family. Now, a couple of families I've met as potential clients in the last week or so have had neither wills nor life insurance and have youngish children. I'm talking here about life insurance which doesn't just cover the mortgage but leaves cash for what might end up being a single parent to keep going. I have a colleague that I worked with many years ago who's still in the business and who still makes it a point of whomever he sees, of whatever age, of trying to sell them life insurance. Many find this very annoying. He sees it as his social duty. So I'd say keep at it, Marco. At the other end of the age scale, life insurance has come back into its own, and this is where tax is coming in, as one of the few remaining ways to tackle the problem of inheritance tax. And it has become a big problem for many whose pensions were previously going to be outside of their estates and exempt from inheritance tax, and where the inclusion of those pensions will now make them or their heirs liable for inheritance tax, or at least much more inheritance tax than was previously assumed. Now, making a gift into trust to pay the premiums for life insurance each month can provide either the funds needed to pay that inheritance tax bill, or simply, another way of thinking of it, replace the legacy or the inheritance that the family might have thought they were going to get. Here's how it works, and without getting too technical, the sort of life insurance policy we'd set up for parents with children would more often than not be what's called a joint life first death policy, which, as the name suggests, pays out when the first person dies, or depending on what they go for, is diagnosed with serious illness. But for inheritance tax planning, it would for a married couple, or of course it could now be a civil partnership, it would be a second death policy which pays out into a trust, and so outside of the estate and free of tax, when both of the parties have died, as the inheritance tax liability comes when everything goes on to the family or the next generation or others when both have gone. No inheritance tax payable between spouses. The way to think of this sort of policy is as a monthly gift being made to the family rather than a monthly cost, as the family will eventually get the benefit of it to make up, perhaps in full or at least in part, for what's going to the taxman. Now, this sort of policy can actually be very good value. The way life insurance actuaries work these things out takes into account that two people have to die before it pays out. For a couple I spoke to last week, both just about 60, it meant that they would have to live for another 75 years to have paid in more than will eventually be paid out when they've both gone. But here's the thing. I've had this conversation with others who are rather older and for whom inheritance tax is a, well, let's say more imminent concern. And sadly, they've more often than not had something happen health-wise by that time and so can't get insured. Like all insurance, the advice is get it while you can. Get it before the flood happens, when you don't think you need it or when you think you might not need it, and not when you think you will need it or it might be too late. Fellow financial advisors, I think we need to be a bit tougher. I think we need to get back to selling stuff.